Welcome to the Lessons from the Game podcast, the podcast where we break down the hard-hitting lessons from rugby and show how they apply performance, mindset and resilience, both on and off the field.
I'm Ben Pegna, and alongside Gurthro Steenkamp, we sit down with top players, coaches and experts to uncover what it really takes to succeed. But then you think about, okay, but what can I control in this situation? How can I stay positive? What can I improve in this situation? Let's assume it is good feedback and it's something, you've been dropped for something that's deemed valid. You've got to think, okay, what can I do to control these controllables? What can I change? What can I, and also.
Good day, everybody. We just like to say thank you for all the unbelievable support we've been receiving since the launch of our podcast. Not in our biggest dreams, we realized it would have been getting the traction that it's gotten so far, and all the message, all the support that we've been getting, it's just been unbelievable. So to help us to continue grow the show, please make sure on whichever platform you are listening or watching our podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, please like it, subscribe to it, and make sure you are following our different pages on all different platforms. Help us to grow our show. And please, if you have the possibility to give us a 5-star rating, if you like the episode, please do so. And also comment on the different platforms, give us some feedback, and we will do our best to reply as quickly as possible. Now let's go on to the show. Good day, everyone, and welcome to our short form episode here on the Lessons from the Game podcast with my co-host Ben Pegna. And today we will be deep diving into how to come back from setbacks or injuries. This is a question we've recently been receiving a lot from our audience on the podcast, as well as our social media platforms. But just a quick check-in. Ben, brother, how are you doing? All good your side?
Yeah, good, G. Yeah, looking forward to this one. It's been such a big part of my both playing and I guess coaching life and journey that this is really relevant. And it's, as you said, we've been getting stuff about this in from people. So it's really, really good one to be talking about and addressing. So excited about it.
No, awesome. This is great stuff. I think this is very important for our audience because we do know as athletes, we both experienced it in our playing days. Ben, you being involved with some great clubs with the London Scottish Saracens. You've played abroad in Australia, New Zealand, and you spent some time in South Africa as well. We've all went through periods. Is there something that you can share with our audience? Was there a time that you went through a tough injury? Tell us a bit about the process to coming back.
Yeah, I had a lot of injuries and each time was slightly different and there were a few significant ones. And what I found was, the one that immediately springs to mind is when I played for England. I'd been to Dubai with England Sevens. I'd had a problem in my leg and nobody could diagnose what it was. And I joined Wasps and I found out that I had something called MRSA. Eventually they diagnosed it. And MRSA is a big, it's a mouthful, but methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Now you're not going to, I had to research it a lot anyway. So basically I couldn't find an expert who dealt with a professional rugby player coming back from having that. They couldn't diagnose it at first. When they eventually did, it was basically the beginning of the end of my playing, but having to come back, and I did get back on the field and I did play at a decent level, and having to deal with that and all the different stages you go through was a significant part of my life, actually, and taught me a lot about myself and a lot about people around you and how to handle yourself and how to deal with those setbacks. So that was a significant time. What about you, mate?
Oh, man, I think one that really hits home was, I think it was back in 2005. I was finally earning my spot in the Springbok team, and we were in Australia, and I think it was Perth, if I'm not mistaken, and I broke my scaphoid. And I thought, okay, maybe I can still play, just strap it up. And, once we did the scan, I realized I need to got operated. The bone didn't want to fuse. I was still young back then in 2005. I was only 24. First operation wasn't successful. I had to go for a second one. They had to do a bone graft, take bone from my hip and apply that onto my scaphoid. And I found myself being out for 2 years. 2 years where I wasn't playing rugby. And if I look back at it now, it was intense. And, that was a massive learning curve for me because in that period I picked up 20 kgs. I was overweight. I was going out a lot. I was spending time in restaurants, doing things that I was not supposed to do. I was completely off track. And luckily for me, I still had a team that believed in me. The Bulls back then, Heineke Meyer, Jake White still believed in me. But I think the big turning point was when I realized, when I got that massive shock. I always knew I was overweight, but I thought maybe 10 kgs. I didn't think 20. And it just shows you how ignorant I was back then. I didn't even take the time to weigh myself. I picked up my clothes, was getting too small. I had to go basically buy a new wardrobe. I mean, come on, how stupid are you? But I was young, I was naive, I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, being a Springbok player and at that stage earning good money. So buying drinks for everyone, you're going out and about. But when reality sunk in, when I realized, 2006, end of the year, the following year's a World Cup, I knew I had to wake up. I knew it was time for me to come back and I needed to get out of that rut. It was very simple. I had a great support system around me. I realigned myself with my vision in terms of what I wanted to achieve. I created the plan. I got a team behind me. I started working. I was consistent in my efforts. I was willing to do what was necessary. We spoke to Basil, my former S&C coach, who was instrumental in my return to play. He just told me exactly what to do, and I did it. There was no question asked. But I think the key was as well in that journey, and I'm giving you the short version of it because we definitely want to deep dive into the process and the line of thought of it. I enjoyed the small victories. I acknowledged those moments, the small gains, losing 1 kilo, losing 2 kilos, going sub 130. Back then, I was weighing 142. And, I eventually got back, and that came down to pure commitment. But I think what the biggest thing we can really add value here is, Ben, to our listeners and to our viewers that are watching, is maybe give them a process. We are both different and we speak to different people. And I think maybe if you can maybe share, what would you advise to players? What is the process that you should follow when you want to come back from an injury, especially whether it's a long-term injury? Because obviously short-term is different. It's kind of easier to manage, but those long-term injuries are tough.
Yeah, and I think there's a few elements to this conversation as well, G. Okay, so it affects everybody. So you were a World Cup winner and won everything else, and super successful. And my situation was nonetheless as hard in a different way. And there'll be another guy out there listening to this, and their situation is equally as hard, and they're an amateur player or an aspiring player or a young player or whatever. So, and I think what we're going to talk about is applicable for everybody, which is obviously why we're doing this today,
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes back to foundational stuff before this happens as well. I think knowing who you are and really understanding who you are, and hopefully your identity isn't solely as and in this case as a rugby player, and who you surround yourself with, because there will come a point where if you're not careful, you surround yourself with people like you spoke about just now, who validate who you become and who you are, and you can justify your behavior. So, if you're going out drinking loads and you're being the good time guy, and they're all benefiting from that because they're partying with you and basically you're buying the drinks, then they're going to continue to tell you there's nothing wrong with your lifestyle. So who you surround yourself in on this journey is really, really important. And, it's the old sayings about don't believe all the things that when people give you all this over the top praise and it's really high, and when people completely, are overcritical and it's really, and you bring you right down here, the truth is somewhere in between, and it's important you surround yourself, I think, with the right people who are going to be constant, who are going to be consistent, who are going to be loving, but also honest with you, and that's a really, if you have that, that with your family, that's an amazing thing. And if you have that with some other people, with coaches and other people in that support network, I think that's a really, really important place to start, even before you're injured. And then some of the other stuff, I think comes from that. So when you had that awakening moment, if you want to call it that, when you were suddenly intrinsically motivated, I want to play in the World Cup. Now, someone else might not have that awakening moment, and they might rely on someone in that support network to bring that awakening moment. And that person is somebody who's been in their life, who provides truth, not because they're going to benefit if you're off the rails or whatever. So that's definitely a starting point for me.
Yeah, it's great. I think, just realizing this is a topic that merits an in-depth discussion, and we'll do our best to stay on the time, Ben. But I think from all the different experience I had, because I also had a few injuries back in my career, whether it was a knee, a meniscus, ankle, I broke my arm. I think breaking my arm, that was a big one for me in 2010. I was on top of my game. I was player of the year that year in South Africa, and that once again a year before the World Cup. But it's true what you said, and I think I want to try and frame this for players, whether they're amateur or semi-professional, professional. I'm going to share them a process which I believe will help them to get through this journey. I think so. When you get injured, I think the first step that needs to happen is you need to get a proper prognosis. Okay, what is exactly wrong? What just happened to you? And to really establish how long will that return to play period take? Is it the 6 months process, the 9 months? We see that with the tendon, Achilles, and all those type of injuries, big knee ligaments injuries. You need to establish what happened and determine what is the period of return to play. The second step is, and it's something I think Dan Carter, he mentioned in his book, The Art of Winning, if I'm not mistaken, he said, you got to allow yourself to grieve. You got to feel those emotions. And luckily we live in a society today where we can say showing your vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And I advise people to be surrounded. You just means what you're surrounded with. It's very important. So allow yourself to grieve, but then very quickly realign and then say, what is my vision? What are my goals? What do I want to achieve? Is it still my goal to one day play for a professional team? Is it my goal still to become the starter in the finals of our championship? What are my goals? Do I want to get extension on my contract? Or do I want to get my first professional? So realign yourself with your vision or your goals. And then you need to put out a clear plan, a return to play plan. All right, what are the different stages? Stage 1 will be recovery, just allowing the body to heal. So often in that stage, you've got to occupy your mind with different things. I always advise players to maybe get focused on their studies, develop another skill. There are some unbelievable platforms these days online. You need to have a clear plan. When will I be starting physio, rehab? When will I be starting, for example, let's say you've got a knee injury. When do I start to walk? When I start doing weights? So do you have this different stages in your return to play, or RTP as we would use it in elite sports? When do I do what? So like that, you know where you're going. And then all you got to do is you got to stay obsessed with the plan, with the process. But then you need to build a team. So when you're an agent, you need to make sure you've got a top-notch doctor, got a great physio, a great S&C coach. You need your teammates, you need your friends, you need your family, you need your support system. Because you need to maintain balance. Everything can't just be about that injury. And a big part I will also add is that you need to have that social connection. And that's what you need. You need to stay accountable. And the key for you to get back to where you need to be, you also need to accept that there might be periods you need to adjust or change. The timeline will change. It might accelerate, it might slow down. You also need to deal with that. You need to accept that it's part of the process. So for me, the main thing at the end is you got to believe in the process. You got to trust the process, because belief drives behavior. And this is a simple process which I use, Ben. I've used it now. For example, I got my pedal injury. I pulled my car 4 weeks to this date. And honestly, when I got injured, I grieved for 15 minutes. I grieved for 15 minutes. Then I said, okay, all I just need to do is, what is the prognosis? Doctor told me 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, great. 4 to 6 weeks, I'll start running, walking at 4 weeks' time. I can start doing bike in the 3rd week. I'll be doing rehab in the 3rd week. And I built my plan. And I know in another 2 weeks' time, I'll play my first paddle game. Or I might just sneak it in next week when I'm back in Toulouse. Who knows? But this is a simple process that I think can guide our listeners. Yes.
That's brilliant, G. I think you covered it, most of it. And, I wrote down before you said it, I just wrote down setbacks, when you have those secondary setbacks that you then spoke about. And I wrote down accountability, which you also spoke about at the end there, because, when you've got those people around you, they can hold you accountable, but also.
Brother, telepathy.
Yeah. We're on the same. And you know what? I think, in addition to what you've spoken about, the psychological element is huge. And what's going to happen is you've got to acknowledge, and you spoke about also acknowledging the process and the injury and then the process. And if you're at this outset, you acknowledge there's going to be some dark moments. There's going to be some tough times. I'm aware that they're going to come. I'm not pretending they're not going to come. It's impossible just to say, stay positive, stay positive. There's going to be some dark moments, but I acknowledge them. They're real. But what am I doing to change the situation? And I know, and I think you probably experienced the same. And that example I gave earlier of when I had MRSA and I just joined Wasps, and it happened every time I was injured. When you get injured, you feel like you're the spare part. You would just feel like the boys don't want me hanging around. I'm like a bad smell. I'm just lingering. I'm getting all the physio. People half make jokes. Oh, you're just here for the physio. Every time I come in here, you're in here. You're just here for that. Yeah. And then you actually start, it's impossible not to take some of that on board. And so I would say, think about whatever situation you're in, when you can get to the stage where you can be, do something. That's never the case anyway. I think it's really important to acknowledge that most of the time when you think people are talking about you or thinking about you or saying something, they're not even aware you're there. It's just something we become very inward facing. So be aware that part of that stage is probably going to happen, and address it before it does happen. Think, okay, when that does happen, it's probably, I'm imagining it. Okay. But I'm going to do everything I can to be a positive influence in the environment. So what does that mean? When I can be, I'm going to be out there. Coach, can I help? Put the cones out. Can I, do this? Can I help set up the presentation for training in the evening? Can I help in any other way? Can I run the water on match days? What can I do to be a positive influence and still be relevant, so that A, I'm still feeling like I'm valuable, B, the guys I'm still connected to the guys, and C, when I do come back into the team, I'm up to speed. I know what's going on. I can just come back in seamlessly because I've been around. I've been hearing what the coach has been saying every session. So being that positive person in that environment is something that you can do to take control in a positive way, and now allows you to feel like, I am adding value still. I'm still contributing. I'm not just making up the numbers here and eating the free lunch,
No, I think what I would just like to add there, because I think we also need to talk about, what happens when you don't get selected, when you get dropped from a team. I think that's another one as well. That's also a setback in the game that we love. But I think we mentioned there, to summarize what you said, you got to stay involved, like staying up to date with changes in the game plan, try and be involved and contribute where you at, whichever meeting you're in. So maybe like being involved and analyzing the defense of the opposition or the attack, get involved in the team strategy. But then it's also up to the team as well to keep that player involved, constantly checking in with the player. How is he doing? Is he okay? Is everything all right? And also knowing when you get those moments of darkness, it's okay. Speak to someone, speak to a friend, speak to a family member. And if it's really, really dark, speak to a professional. We just had Ollie Phillips on last night, and he spoke to a therapist. We live in a world today, in a society today, where it's okay to say I'm seeing a therapist. Doesn't mean you're weak or there's something wrong with you. But Ben, I want to move this along quickly because we're not going to make our mark today. It's okay. We're going to keep on going. So a lot of players, when they get dropped, they get frustrated. They're not getting selected. We see a lot in the professional game. Unfortunately, sometimes not everybody's like South Africa. They have 3 teams, but they can rotate and choose a different starting 15 each game. And we do tend to see some players that don't get enough game time or they get dropped, So how do you deal with that? Because you work with football players, professional in the Premiership, professional football players in the UK. You work with rugby players as well. How do you guide them?
How do you deal with it as a player or when you're dropping somebody?
No, how do you deal as a player? I think we need to speak that from a coach's point of view at a later stage on another podcast.
Yeah, as a player, as a player, I think it's really important, as we said before, that you know your role, you know what you're good at, what your strengths are, and what you're bringing to the team. And that doesn't change whether, it can be up and down. Now, sometimes the delivery from the coach is very harsh, and it can be really harsh criticism. And it's not very good coaching, if I'm honest. And it puts you as the player, the individual, in a bad space because you're told, I'm putting this other guy in because he's better at tackling. And suddenly you're in a downward spiral thinking that, well, what's wrong with my tackling? How can I improve my tackling? And then when you eventually do get back in the team, you're second guessing every defensive move that you make. And so you can't, as I said earlier, you can't be either up or too high or too low in terms of your mental outlook based on this external feedback that you're going to get. And so you really need to know yourself. You have to be confident within, saying, what am I good at? What are my strengths? I am a good tackler. I wouldn't be a professional rugby player if I wasn't a good tackler. But
guys that can't tackle.
but then you think about, okay, but what can I control in this situation? How can I stay positive? What can I improve in this situation? Let's assume it is good feedback and it's something, you've been dropped for something that's deemed valid. You've got to think, okay, what can I do to control these controllables? What can I change? What can I, and also, unfortunately, the optics and how it's perceived, your behavior and your reaction is very, very important. So we've all coached those players who, when they've received feedback, they bounce back, and they are positive and they are coachable and they're enthusiastic and they don't take it personally. But we've also seen those other players who will go away and sulk and they're negative and they're quite toxic for the environment and they're having these little sideshow conversations. And we've seen that. The truth, having sat on both sides of the fence, is nobody really wants to be around that latter guy who's like, and you don't want him in your environment. You want the player who's not an energy sapper, an energy giver. And so that player who has received that feedback, who has been dropped, you need to do whatever you can to be that energy provider and not that energy sapper.
I like it. Don't be an energy vampire. I totally agree with you. I think, Ben, it's a tough one. I think first it comes down to coaches. So, it all depends on the coaching style as well. Unfortunately, I've also been on the receiving end at times in my career where coaches weren't always honest with me. And sometimes they were honest with me and it was sometimes tough to hear. But I think the biggest, if I can give a player a process, okay, you've been dropped, you're not playing. Instead of being frustrated and, like you mentioned, sulking and just being toxic, first understand why. Why am I not playing? Is it just a pure choice of the coach? He just prefers the other player, like you just mentioned. Maybe there's not really something technically wrong with my game. He just prefers the other player. Maybe we've seen in the past, back in the day, I'll take my example. In the World Cup in 2007, Jake White, he preferred Osterrand, way more experience. I was young and up and coming. I felt I deserved to play, but that was his choice. I was working hard. But I would definitely advise players, first understand why you're not playing. What is the reason? Is it due to I'm not fit enough? I'm not conditioned? I'm not working hard enough? I'm not working around the defense? I'm out of place? I'm not connected? Made a few handling errors? Whatever it is, you need to identify what is one of the reasons. And in order to do that, you need to have honest conversations, and hopefully your coach will give it an interview. And it's not always the case where the coach will give that feedback. Sometimes coaches are not comfortable with that. But then it's also up to you to go analyze your own game. Watch your game if you have access to it. Speak to your teammates, get their point of view. And then you go on to the next question. What do I do now? What should I be working on? What should I be showcasing? What image, what pictures do I give to the coaches and to the staff? Because I take from a personal point of view, we watch everything as coaches in the high level. We're looking at what a player is doing at training, and we actually look for those pictures to kind of confirm why you should be playing again, why you should get that opportunity. So we never really look at the reasons why and justify why players shouldn't be playing. So my advice would be first, figure out what is the reason why you've been dropped or why you're not playing. Then once again, what should you be doing? What should you be working on? Or what pictures should you be giving to the staff? But then again, remind yourself of what you want to achieve and use this as an opportunity to upskill yourself. Not necessarily just like you mentioned. I like what you said, Ben. If a coach says to you, you've been dropped because of your tackling, don't zoom into your tackling. Work on it, but still level up on your other skills of the game.
100%. And just I think you covered that brilliantly. And the one thing I would add is for the amateur player, I've seen this situation a lot. I've spoken to young amateur players and, maybe schoolboy players, and in my experience, and they've said to me, "Oh, but the coach hasn't told me." And I remember being a bit like that as a player, but thinking I'm only going to speak to the coach if he speaks to me. And then I've said to the player, "Well, have you gone to speak to them?" "Oh, no, no, no." And the conversation is a two-way street. And I've asked the player, "Well, how many relationships do you think that coach is managing?" He's an amateur coach. He's ringing around trying to organize a team. He's dealing with at least 30 players. He's sometimes dealing with parents. He's having about 200 different conversations. And you're thinking just about yourself, and that you're assuming he's thinking, and he's drilled down into how you're thinking. And maybe that coach hasn't got the time, or hasn't had the time to be thinking about, it's not even crossed their mind that you're really going through this inner turmoil because you're overthinking about why you're dropped, and that they're oblivious because they're trying to manage like 50 other relationships all at the same time. So the message to those players is open up. Don't be afraid to open up that line of communication yourself. Show that you're hungry, show that you're motivated, show that you're willing to learn and develop, and you're humble. Demonstrate those things to the coach, and the coach will embrace that.
Yeah, totally. Be humble in your approach. Ben, we need to end this. We're going to try and stick to our timing. We've already gone over, but okay, this is our first attempt. So, should I say to our audience, for those of you listening and our viewers that are watching, if you enjoyed this podcast that we just shared with you, please like it, subscribe to it, help us grow the show, share it with your friends. And if you need us to go deeper, maybe give us a case study, give us something specific that happened to a friend that made something very specific, and we'll be happy to work at Ben and maybe go a bit more in depth and obviously we're not professionals, we're not medical professionals, we're not, I know Ben has S&C background, but we'll do our best to give you guys guidance on your journey. So we would like to thank you for joining us on our podcast, The Lessons from the Game, and looking forward to speaking to you soon. Ciao.